I want to start this a little differently because I have a feeling you've heard some version of this before. And still, here you are listening again. That's not random. It's rarely coincidence when a message keeps circling back, especially when life feels heavier than usual and you can't quite put your finger on why. Sometimes the repetition isn't about learning something new, it's about finally being ready to hear what's already familiar. Before we get into this, take a second to settle in. If you found yourself returning to messages like this lately, it might help to stay connected. Subscribe if you want more reflections like this each week. Now let's talk about pressure. Have you ever noticed how pressure tends to show up right before things change? Not the dramatic kind you can explain easily, but that quiet, constant weight that sits on your chest or shoulders and doesn't quite let up. Everything still works technically, but nothing feels easy anymore. Come on, be honest, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The same responsibilities suddenly feel heavier. The same pace feels tighter. The same environment feels smaller than it used to. When that happens, most people assume something is off. They think they pushed too far, waited too long, or missed a window they were supposed to catch. But what if that interpretation is backwards? What if the pressure isn't a warning sign at all, but a signal? I know that idea probably sounds familiar. You've likely heard something like it before. Still, have you ever actually sat with it long enough to ask why the pressure is showing up now and not earlier? Pressure has a strange way of revealing timing. It rarely arrives at the beginning. It tends to show up after you've already grown past something familiar, after you've learned what you needed to learn at one level, after the old way starts feeling too tight to hold who you're becoming. When things fit, you don't feel pressure. Discomfort usually starts when expansion begins, and that's the part most people don't recognize while they're living inside it. And let's be real for a moment. Pressure isn't poetic when you're experiencing it. It's inconvenient. It's exhausting. It shows up as deadlines, expectations, decisions, and weight you didn't ask for all at once. You didn't wake up hoping for more pressure. You asked for growth. You asked for clarity. You asked for progress. Pressure just happens to be how capacity is built. I know you might smile at that. I did too when it finally clicked that no one really advertises that part. No one says, here's the growth you wanted, and by the way, it's going to feel uncomfortable for a while. But if you look closely, pressure always comes with expansion. Muscles don't strengthen without resistance. Endurance doesn't grow without load. Structure doesn't hold without being tested. Have you ever thought about how much you've already learned to carry compared to a few years ago? Things that once overwhelmed you now feel manageable. Decisions that once felt paralyzing now feel familiar. That didn't happen by accident. That happened because pressure trained you quietly, without asking for your permission or giving you advance notice. Now here's where it gets tricky. When new pressure shows up, your instinct might be to pull back, to simplify everything, to look for relief as quickly as possible, and sometimes rest really is what's needed. But other times, what feels like relief is actually avoidance. There's a difference between rest and retreat, and it's worth being honest about which one you're choosing in this season. Pressure doesn't mean you're failing. It often means you're outgrowing the container you're in, the environment, the habits, the expectations, even the version of yourself that worked before might no longer be sufficient. That's when things start feeling tight. Conversations change, goals shift. Tolerance drops for things you used to accept without question. Come on, be honest, some things don't fit anymore, and you've known it for a while. When life feels too tight to be right, it's usually because growth has exceeded the space you're standing in. Expansion doesn't happen politely. It presses until there's room. Most people panic right there and assume tightness means danger. But tightness often means transition. Think back to other seasons of your life. The moments right before major shifts probably didn't feel calm or clear. They felt compressed, uncertain, like everything was being squeezed at once. Pressure has a way of exposing what can no longer support where you're going. It reveals habits that don't scale, mindsets that can't carry more weight, patterns that once worked but now limit progress. That part isn't comfortable. It can feel personal. It can feel unfair. It can feel like too much. But pressure doesn't arrive without purpose. It shows up because there is something inside you capable of holding more than you realize. And yes, Sometimes the ground does shake. Familiar structures shift. What once felt solid changes shape. Roles adjust. Expectations evolve. It can feel like you're losing footing when in reality you're finding a deeper one. Shaking seasons often coincide with growth beneath the surface. Roots deepen when the ground moves, and strength forms where cracks appear. So before you start questioning yourself, hear this plainly. You are not being punished. You are not being singled out. You are not failing because things feel heavy. You are being trained. Training isn't glamorous. It's repetitive, uncomfortable, and inconvenient. But it prepares you to hold what's coming. There's a reason this season feels different from the last one. You're not the same person. Your capacity has increased, and with increased capacity comes increased responsibility. That's not a curse. It's readiness. Pressure refines. It clarifies. And when the breakthrough arrives, you'll recognize it. Not because everything suddenly feels easy, but because you'll realize you were quietly being shaped to handle it all along. What pressure is really doing is asking you to become more honest with yourself. Honest about what you're capable of. Honest about what you've been avoiding. Honest about whether the systems you're relying on are still strong enough to support the direction you're moving in. Pressure doesn't invent these questions. It surfaces the ones that were already there, waiting for your attention. This is where many people misunderstand the moment they're in. They assume the discomfort means they need to shrink back to something simpler, something safer. But pressure rarely shows up when you're supposed to retreat. It shows up when you're being asked to expand without abandoning integrity. Expansion without grounding leads to collapse. Pressure forces alignment before growth continues. Sometimes the pressure isn't about doing more. Sometimes it's about doing differently. You may notice your tolerance changing. Things you once pushed through start feeling misaligned. Conversations feel heavier. Obligations feel louder. That's not weakness. That's discernment developing. Capacity grows alongside clarity, and clarity has a way of removing patience for what no longer fits. There's also a quiet recalibration that happens in seasons like this. Your internal standards shift. You begin to feel the difference between movement and momentum, between being busy and being effective. Pressure exposes where energy is leaking and where it's being invested wisely. That awareness can feel uncomfortable, but it's also deeply empowering once you stop resisting it. If you look closely, pressure often arrives when your outer world hasn't caught up to your inner growth yet. You've changed internally, but your environment is still operating on old expectations. That gap creates tension. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because recalibration takes time. Pressure lives in that gap. It doesn't mean you're late, it means alignment is underway. This is also why pressure can feel isolating. Not everyone around you understands the weight you're carrying. Not everyone sees the expansion happening beneath the surface. Growth is often invisible before it becomes evident. Pressure works in the unseen spaces, strengthening foundations long before results appear. So if this season feels heavier than the last, pause before judging it. Ask better questions. What is being strengthened? What is being clarified? What is no longer negotiable? Pressure doesn't demand panic, it invites presence. And presence is where you regain your footing. You don't need to rush this part. You don't need to escape it either. Let pressure do what it was designed to do, shape you, prepare you, stretch you just enough to hold what comes next.